Yeah, well, it was about 2 years ago now, I think, and there was a young lad in Swansea who'd been permanently excluded. There were concerns that he was from an ethnic background. There were concerns about the way the school had dealt with a number of things, including that issue as well. And so I was contacted by EYST. Uh, the case was raised to me and asked if we could help out at all. We're one of the few, Watkins and Gunn, we're one of the very few firms in Wales doing anything like this kind of thing at all. We do a lot of our work, most of our work's on legal aid. So when they came to us, it was Esther and the family were aware that they weren't going to be charged, crazy lawyers' fees. So we looked at it, felt there was reasonable legal grounds for opposing the exclusion, and through EYST we managed to secure help from a barrister to represent the lad at the first appeal hearing. That's an independent appeal panel which all local authorities will have. That's appealing from the governor's decision to uphold the exclusion. So the appeal went there to the independent appeal panel. Unfortunately, they, as often is the case, they sided with the school. We examined the decision of the panel with the barrister and felt the panel had made a few wrong steps in law. And on that basis, we thought we could challenge the panel's decision in the High Court, and that's a process called judicial review. And you have to appeal on a point of law. So just because you don't like a decision doesn't mean you can go to judicial review. You have to be saying this as they've gone wrong as a matter of law. And as I said, that we're able to, children are eligible for legal aid in their own rights in exclusion cases. So it doesn't matter what the parents' circumstances, income, property is. As long as the child hasn't got lots of money sloshing around, the child is eligible. So we persuaded the legal aid agency to back the case, and then brought on, as well as using the young barrister we'd used in the initial appeal, we brought in a leading King's Counsel barrister as well to help out, and we issued judicial review proceedings, and it went all the way to a hearing in Cardiff in early 2022, and we made a number of legal arguments, but the judge said that our most fundamental one was correct, and that was that the legal argument was that the panel, the independent panel, they hadn't themselves taken a view as to the seriousness of the offence. They kind of just adopted that the school thought it was very serious, so it must be serious. And they then went on and made further considerations, but the guidance, and there's Welsh Government guidance as to how appeal panels should approach exclusion appeals, and the guidance says that the panel, have to themselves decide the seriousness of the offence, and everything then flows from that. So they hadn't done that. They'd taken a misstep, and so by adopting the school's seriousness, they more or less are kind of saying, there you go. In a way, they're making their decision then. They can only really go one way in a way with that decision. And so that was the major misstep they took. And because of that, the decision was unlawful. And so the decision was quashed. By that time, the lad in question had actually moved on to another school. If he hadn't wanted to do that, we probably would have been able to get the case heard much quicker. But because he was moving on, that kind of urgency disappeared. That's why it took 6 months to be heard. Well, it might have been heard in only a few weeks if need be. But but the point was that it was very important for the family and the young lad and his family that there wasn't this stain on his academic career, particularly as he had aspirations to go to higher education, to university, maybe into the professions. So he was very, for him, it was still a big matter that this had to be expunged from his record, and that was the outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, because
So basically, the case was identified by EYST. They supported it early on, and basically helped us all the way through with any little bits and bobs of information we needed. Kept the client and the client's family content and happy that everything was being done properly for them. So it was a team effort. But that's a good example of a case which went all the way to the High Court and now become a very important case on Welsh exclusions.
so how do you think that that case affected the school's procedure? Like, what were the consequences of that for the school?
Well, not just the school, it's Swansea local authority. I mean, I would hope that they immediately then put on training for all their independent appeal panel members to tell them what this case was all about and what it meant. So I hope they did that. I mean, there was some criticism of the school's kind of rather robust nature in dealing with this young lad and his family. And this young lad was consistently trying to apologize and show that there was a great deal of sorrow in what he'd done. He'd been said some inappropriate things to a teacher, and he was immediately sorry about it. He had a blemish-free record before. All these points the family were constantly making in the early days after the incident, and the school and the head teacher's response, they didn't cover themselves in glory, if I put it like that, and that did come across. So one would hope that the school and the local authority themselves would again look at that and say, look, when you have these issues, is there a better way of dealing with it, a more sensitive, conciliatory, constructive way? And the trouble is, it's exclusion is a very emotional matter. It's often things are happening at pace, so it can be difficult for both sides, teachers and families. But I think one must always remember that it's the child facing a permanent exclusion. It doesn't come any bigger than that in their life. It could be at that probably it's the biggest thing that's happened in their life to date, and it's which will undoubtedly change the course of their life forever. Basically,
Yeah, yeah,
if you are permanently excluded, your life will change. It's a sliding door moment in a pupil's life, and
yeah,
so no matter how, even if the school is thinking that they've got that it's a difficult situation, they need to bear that in mind, because for the head teacher, he's gonna he or she, it's their job and they get on with their job. But for a young girl or lad who's permanently excluded, it's a life-changing moment in their life, for them.
yeah. And do you think that obviously this is just one case? Do you think that this might have happened to a lot of other children, and obviously maybe their cases haven't been highlighted, or they've just been excluded and they've had to move on?
I think that's almost certainly well, yeah, that is. There's no doubt that's the case. There's no doubt that there's as we speak today, there are probably a couple of dozen permanent exclusions being handed out in Wales, and probably most of them are could be a questionable, or certainly bear scrutiny, if I put it like that. And there's probably, as we speak, there's probably dozens and dozens of unlawful exclusions going on at the moment, where kids have been sent home early or are being educated in a cupboard somewhere to keep them away from people. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and within this case, it wasn't to do with racism, it was to do with the procedure being unlawful, in the fact that they had to go to an independent panel, and that independent panel, like you said, had just adopted the school's view automatically without really being an independent panel, so they hadn't done their job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the point. Yeah, that's why they fell foul of the guidance, because they have to basically put themselves, basically you turn back time and say, right, this has happened. You, the independent appeal panel, have to make all the decisions and weigh up all the facts. You can't say adopt bits of the school's approach. Yeah.
So obviously this project, Right to Education project by EYST, is very, very important. They're going to be able to help more more people out there that in case they've been in the same situation, because as a parent I think it's quite difficult to know what the procedure is. You might not necessarily know what the legality is or what the procedure is because you might not have come across that previously, you know.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, parents will be totally befuddled, and there's no, people aren't kind of signposted to independent representation. In my experience, local authorities actively don't want you to speak to a lawyer. Okay, actively do not want you speaking to a lawyer. I've had times where some local authorities have tried to kind of almost literally shut us out of the room, frankly. So it's a really, and yet it becomes a kind of adversarial process, and in an adversarial process you need to have your own person fighting your corner. And whilst the system is as it is, that's the problem. You need somebody to say, hold on a minute, is this evidence right? Have you done this? Have you done that? It might be, yeah, it might be the school has done everything according to the book, and great, fine, well done. But you need someone to get to scrutinize, and I'm afraid that the panels don't necessarily do that. You see, yeah. And,
That
and you need someone to help you get prepared for the panel. That's the thing. The parents at the panel, and against the parent will be somebody from the local authority, a lawyer from the local authority, sometimes a barrister. There'll be somebody who's called a clerk chairing the panel. There'll be governors and head teachers and chairs of governors giving evidence, and then you could have just one parent and the child. I mean, it's just unequal in all senses, basically.
and quite intimidating.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a. They'll say this is not a formal procedure, blah blah blah, but it is formal. There's guidance and legislation. Of course, it's formal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent myself, I would have found that quite daunting. I did make a complaint to a school previously, but I wasn't really satisfied with what happened. So what's the best advice that you could give to parents? Because it is a bit of a minefield, isn't it, really, if you find yourself in this situation? And then also if you think that there is discrimination involved.
Yeah, well, I think with any exclusion, certainly if it's a permanent exclusion. I mean, if it's a short fixed day, that's bad enough, but that's not going to be a life-changing scenario. And but permanent exclusion, you've got, I would say, I'm bound to say it, but you need to get advice. So people like the Right to Education Project are perfect because they're not going to be scary lawyers and the like, and they're a good kind of receptacle for people, because people are quite understandably nervous of lawyers and getting charged, and I totally get that. So you could do with somebody like an honest broker who's on their side to begin with, knows what they're doing, and can say this case doesn't need any legal stuff, or yeah, there needs a legal stuff. So that kind of, such a role for someone like that to fulfill. But ultimately, if it is a permanent exclusion, then really, the parents should get some legal advice, because you need to be prepared for that formal procedure and to be able to fight your corner, and at least have some equality of arms. And as I say, even if it means that there's going to be a bit of a cost at that stage, then you need to think yourself, that cost, as opposed to the child's education being totally, dislocated, is normally going to be a good money well spent. But then, as I said, if the independent appeal panel hears it and makes a decision bad at law, then you can go all the way to the High Court, and legal aid will kick in at that point. So but people just don't know this, and so you've just got to find a point of information, point of access for people, and so that people can be informed and signposted and make informed decisions, which they don't. And there's no criticism of the normal man on the street. They just don't know, and they're not encouraged to know, frankly, either. Yeah.
I totally agree. And also, I think it's not just school systems. I think because at the moment, with this cost of living crisis and all of the services being under pressure, you get passed from pillar to post often.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there'd be other services, for example, social services, or other systems that you find yourself in as an individual that are difficult to navigate. But what I'd like to ask you is what changes or what outcomes, if you had a magic wand, what changes or outcomes would you like to see the councils implement or schools implement?
Oh, that's a good question. It'd be nice if there was some sort of uh cooling off period to kind of give everybody a chance to kind of catch their breath, because sometimes these decisions are made by schools in haste and under pressure from sometimes from staff or parents of another child involved, and maybe the parent of the child who's facing exclusion, they're obviously very emotional, quite understandably. So I'm wondering sometimes if there's a chance of some kind of cooling off period or something before critical decisions are made. um I'd like to see, people are supposed to look at alternatives to exclusion. And this was one of the issues in the case we were talking about, is did the school really seriously consider alternatives to exclusion? So again, I think that's something which is not maybe done as fully as possible. Um, I think those should be, and maybe, um, you know, and training. And I think that training that well, query what training do people get on exclusion. I'm a school governor, and I've attended, just out of interest, sometimes the local authority training which they offer for school governors, and it's okay, but it's a bit kind of, it's a bit kind of go through the motions. And I do wonder if you had somebody like me, and I'm not volunteering to do it, but somebody like me speaking to local authority or schools and saying, look, this is the other side of the coin. Don't you realize this? Don't you think this? Could you do that? I just wonder if their training is as fully balanced as it should be, because and I can tell you, there's no doubt that the independent appeal panel, they are trained by the local authority. They sit in premises, and often in county hall, run by the local authority. They're clerked by a lawyer from the local authority. So I really, really, really do think the independent appeal panels, their appearance of independence is sometimes in question if that's the case. The school governing body, I mean, that's supposed to be fairly informal. I don't think you want to kind of you want to make that more more formal and procedural. I get that, but the independent appeal panel literally is the last resort for children facing exclusion. So that needs to be as able and as independent as possible. And I think that would be so I query about their training, and many of the people who sit on those panels are very, very worthy, good people, no doubt about that. But it's the perception sometimes. I say, when you're sitting in county hall and it's being chaired by somebody who's a member of the county council, does it really look that independent? In my view, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, and I would be interested to find out how their training that they give to individuals is going to be impacted by the anti-racist action plan, because that's getting rolled out now across the board throughout Wales in all of our systems.
Yeah.
So, well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to be speaking to the Right to Education team more about the project, but that was great to hear what you had to say from a legal point of view. And hopefully some of our listeners will be able to, after hearing the show, understand more about how they can get help, and if they have suffered an exclusion from education. So thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, it's my pleasure.